Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's discussion on the state of the U.S. and the world economy as we recover from the pandemic and approach the presidential elections this November. My name is Noel Nefshahir, Director of International Business Services and Industry 4.0 Strategic Partnerships. We're located in Troy, Michigan. Before I introduce my guest, a little background on Automation Alley. We were created in 1999, and today we are now Michigan's Industry 4.0 Knowledge Center with more than 1,200 members. My roles and responsibilities include helping companies do business overseas and educating them how to expand their markets to the rest of the world. On the other side of the coin, we're also involved in foreign direct investment. Essentially, we also help companies set up their operations here in Michigan. And we have an international business center that provides companies with 90 days complimentary office space until they find a permanent location, whether it's for their sales office, research and development facility, or manufacturing production facility. In many cases, all three. Anyway, with me today is Dr. Glassman. He's Managing Director of JP Morgan Chase and also Head Economist for Chase Commercial Banking in New York City. Jim, welcome, and thank you again for taking the time to be with us today. I know you're going to likewise, and I know you're going to provide us with a midterm report on the global economy and what it holds for the remainder of the year and into 2021. So I'd like to start in the 20 minutes, half an hour that we have to ask you a few questions. And it's always good to hear your firsthand insights. And I always view you as a sea of tranquility and a fountain of eternal optimism in a world of madness. So anyway, I'd like to start by asking you what the economic recovery from the coronavirus will look like this year and going into next.
Yeah, no. This is the debate we've been having since the get-go. When we asked people to stay home and asked businesses to turn out their lights, it was a big argument about what's this going to look like. My feeling is that it was always going to look and feel like a natural disaster phenomenon. Chaotic, a lot of upheaval, but because we took this path, because we needed to figure out how to keep people distance in order to manage the burden on hospitals, that's why we're doing what we're doing. But a part of that meant that we would have to respond aggressively to help people who get furloughed to make sure people are covered. So I personally think the dynamic that we're in here is going to look more like a natural disaster, not a normal business cycle. This is not a normal business cycle. There's no template that we have from our history books to describe what's going through. So what that means is that the recovery should be quicker. It'll be challenging. There's a lot of guys trying to make a go of it in an era of social distancing is very difficult for some places and for schools. But once we get that medical answer, the lights come back on, and they're already coming back on right now. I think what's really telling is in the 8 weeks between February and middle of April, when we hit bottom, the economy lost a lot of ground. About 8 weeks later, we've recovered a good 40 to 50% of the ground we lost. Labor market data, consumer data, and the reason is because of the policy actions, which were quite aggressive. So I think this is going to be, if this is a normal business cycle, I would say, gee, this is going to take a good decade to get out of the hole we got into. But because I think it's feeling more like it's an unnatural, it's a self-inflicted wound that we inflicted in order to manage the burden on the hospital system. But we're doing a huge job replacing the lost wages that workers who didn't have jobs to go to, we're helping them. So the consumer has the wherewithal. So I think, honestly, by the end of next year, by the end of 2022, it's a 1 or 2 year project, I think. Doesn't mean that it isn't going to leave a mark on how we do things, but I think we're going to be very close to back to where we started within a couple of years, just because of all the help. I mean, there was nothing really wrong with the economy. It's just that we asked people to shut down. So naturally, you're going to have a lot of chaos when you're in the middle of that. But I think this will look very different, and already is looking very different. And I think it'll be a very quick rebound. Doesn't mean everybody's going to make it. I mean, there's going to be a lot of disruption and losses. But yeah. I think for most people, we're doing a pretty good job, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you alluded to something a moment ago, namely the implications of the pandemic on technological innovation,
Whew,
which seems to be driving the equity markets. Can you talk about
exactly.
that a little bit?
Yeah, about the time that you guys were formed, Automation Alley was formed, the last 2 decades have been stunningly uh, something I've never imagined in any textbook. From the technology side to the globalization that's going on, and we're finding that the U.S. economy has been able to operate at much lower levels of unemployment than we thought. Technology is a huge part of this. This really, in my mind, it's always, technology's always been cooking in this country, but something in the 1990s really began to change, and there's a lot of innovation going on. But I think the problem is unless you're really forced to do something about it, uh, everybody's slow to adapt. And what we're finding is the crisis is forcing everybody. If you want to survive, you got to figure out how to do arrange work from home schedules, remote connecting. Consumers suddenly are buying a lot more online than they were. Roughly a third of retail sales is now going online. Retail sales excluding restaurants, grocery stores, and gasoline, the traditional stuff. And that leaped about 10 percentage points back in May. So what's happening is, I think this technology has been brewing, and I think what the market is anticipating is that the crisis is making everybody more familiar with innovation, and they're making them realize there's so much more you can do. And even if it doesn't change life dramatically, what people are guessing is you will always want to develop the a backstop for in case something like this happens again. So I think it's a real big push for technology. And when the market rises because people imagine that technology is going to be doing take over a lot more of our life, well, that provides a lot of funding, private equity, and all these guys. It feeds the monster that we are all embracing, and what it means is that you start getting more rapid advances. And my guess is what you and I are doing now, virtual, Zoom calls, will be much better 5 years from now, 3 years from now,
For
2 years from
sure.
now.
Yeah, you're actually seeing some improvements just in the last few months, whether it's Zoom, Teams,
Yeah,
or Huddle.
yeah,
So, we also, have learned, at least here at Automation Alley, and this is further to your point, that sometimes radical change within an organization has got to come from without, because they could be sort of bureaucratic, slow moving, and we're humans, right? We don't like to change, but sometimes having change forced upon us can be a good thing. And you indicated video conferencing tools, and how it's certainly made us, should I say, more productive and more efficient in the workflow here at Automation Alley. So I think a lot of people are beginning to realize that, these new technologies, although, we're a little slow to embrace them at first, but this, I think, is this pandemic has really accelerated the trend in adopting technologies that we have always said, we're up there on the shelf, but never quite embrace them the way we have in the last 5-6 months. So,
Kodak comes to mind, right? Kodak.
Yeah, that's right.
Unbelievable to me. If they invented a lot of this technology, but
No,
if you've got a traditional business that you're afraid of gutting, it's a basic economic lesson. That's why what you say, that a lot of times change comes from outside. You've got to see somebody embraces the technology and has a better way of doing it, and then suddenly it's very disruptive. So it's a fascinating process to watch. And I think we're going to find out that this event is going to lead to a huge increase in productivity that I saw 10 years ago. And
right.
for the same reason, 10 years ago, in the middle of the crisis, the financial crisis, I remember a lot of clients telling me, I realized that I don't need all these people to do what I'm doing. And if something forces you to survive, and you have the tools for it, we saw this massive jump in productivity in the blink of an eye, like with basically 2009 and 10, when it leaped, and then it didn't do much. but it hasn't done much for the last couple of decades because
Mhm.
we're all more worried about finding the people to fill the jobs that everybody's vacating when they go to retirement from the baby boom generation.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you entirely. Because we're facing that challenge right here in Michigan. Not to mention throughout the country, and for that matter, the
Yeah,
whole world is challenged with finding talent. So,
yeah.
one thing I do want to ask you is that there seems to be a disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street. Why is that, and what's going to close that gap?
It's kind of a natural thing when you think about it. I see a glass half full on this story because the job of the equity market is to look ahead. And so there will always be, when you're in the middle of something big, whether it's an economic crisis or new technology, innovation, or the world is globalizing in a way that we've never really known, when you're in the middle of something big, the equity market's always going to be out of kilter with current reality because people are trying to figure out where is this going and what does it mean and what are the opportunities. And I think it's fascinating what the stock market's doing because this story has been brewing for a good 2 decades. It's the reason why I'm kind of genetically optimistic
Mhm.
because the market has been slowly coming to the realization. If you look at the valuation of the stock market relative to earnings, it's taken a while for the market, in my mind, to recognize that life is changing from the way we grew up. Not only is the U.S. economy performing better, we're running at lower levels of unemployment without inflationary problems, like they kind of knew in the 50s. But the world around us is waking up and wants to go to work, and there's lots of opportunities. And
Right.
so there's lots of opportunity that come from that, and innovation is transforming. So companies like Amazon, um, Google, Microsoft, all these tech companies are changing the way we do things, and this crisis is kind of underscoring that. And so I think in a time of great change, when there is possibly markets will always overdo it, but when it looks like things might be looking a lot different and more efficient, that this event may be taking us to a higher level of living standard, well, it's only natural that the stock market would try to imagine what that means. And you never know who the winners are going to be, but we just smell there's something big going on.
Sure, sure. So, what have we learned from the coronavirus pandemic? I mean, in particular, is the world better prepared to confront another wave of the virus or a future pandemic?
Well, I hope so. I think we've learned a couple really interesting things. And I've always thought when our system is shocked, in a moment of crisis, it always exposes problems or inadequacies in our system. It makes us better because when you stress test a system and you haven't been doing it right or you've been complacent, it makes you realize there's some simple things you can do to make the system better. Well, one of the big lessons we've learned, I think, is first of all, is that the world is getting real small. We're all interconnecting, and we better be thinking hard about future pandemics because when the world is more, business travel is all over the place. We've got operations in Asia popping up all over. And it was interesting that we all heard about the crisis in Wuhan back in the winter, but we all thought, no, this is probably going to miss us because it has in the past. And the blink of an eye, it's spread around the world. And to me, that's a reminder that the world's changing. We're in motion, and it's because markets everywhere are there's opportunities opening up. But I think what we really learned, two things: that when you have a private healthcare system, it's not reasonable. You can't expect a healthcare system to be able to invest in surge capacity for when you have a pandemic. So our hospital system was loaded with flu season, the needs of flu season, which is why Fauci and the health officials told us we need to social distance, we need to flatten the curve. So what we learned was we weren't prepared for this thing, maybe because we dodged a bullet in the previous SARS, MERS, those previous viruses. So what we've learned is we need to do a better job helping our healthcare system uh, be prepared for moments like this. And it isn't complicated. We just need the ICU beds and the ventilators. And having a strategic stockpile of this would help a lot. I think the second thing we've learned, what I've learned, by the way, and I think we as a country can learn, is there are different ways of handling crises like these. We weren't, we don't have a lot of great safety nets for people, and Congress had to step in and double the benefits of the unemployment insurance system, create a program for people who are self-employed, checks in the mail, and I've learned a lot in this crisis because there are other places that do this differently. For example, in Germany, there's been a program around for 100 years called Kurzarbeit. It's a short work program, and what they do, you can sort of understand why Germany does this. They got a lot of people with specialized skills in manufacturing, and they don't want to lose those guys. So over time, what's happened, this program works the following way. If there's a short-term disruption, companies send a notice to the government, which then sends them a check to cover their costs automatically, automatic pilot, whether you're small or big. And then it winds down very quickly when the crisis passes. And the reason, to me, this is an amazing, a lot of European countries copy it, but maybe not as generous. Japan does too. And what's telling about it, if you look back to the last crisis 10 years ago, when the US financial crisis blew up, radiated everywhere, unemployment, everybody went down. Unemployment went up in most places. In Germany, it kept going down. They never saw, their labor market never saw the disruption because they have this ability to put everybody in a whole flight holding pattern when there's a temporary crisis. And it's probably a cheaper way to do it. And I kind of think, they do it because they worry a lot about if you lose people, if people get laid off and they disappear, then you got to retrain a whole new generation of people. And they focus a lot on manufacturing and specialized skills in manufacturing. So this is exactly what we were trying to emulate with our PPP program. The Paycheck Protection Program was trying to emulate that process.
I know also that Germany has the model for the best apprenticeship program in the world, and they actually stole a page out of the American playbook. So hopefully one day we'll go back to apprenticeship. So when we
see a lot of that.
Yeah. Face future crises like this, we'll be a little bit more prepared to counter it. So
we're spending $4 trillion on this one. The way I look at it, the cost so far of lost wages is about $700 billion. So had we had a program like this, it would have cost far less to compensate businesses for their lost revenue and workers for their lost wages. So it really pays to think hard. I mean, everybody is feeling this. This crisis is rippling all around the world, and everybody has a slightly different way of looking at it. And there's probably a lot of things we're going to learn from the different ways that people do it.
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, it's certainly going to make us stronger and more adept to, countering a future crisis like this.
Which we're bound to have, right? I mean,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, hopefully it'll be another 100 years, but.
Oh yeah, but the way the way we're all sort of interconnecting and becoming more and more dependent on each other, and business travel is a big part of that. It's gonna be hurt for a while, but all that means is there's going to be more mixing going on. We're bound to see more spread of these kinds of things in the future.
So we were comparing and contrasting the Spanish flu to the current pandemic, and of course, air travel has really contributed to the contagion because there was 4 billion flights last year that people took, whether domestically or internationally. So we wonder why the contagion spread like wildfire. I mean, here it was, everybody thought it was safely contained within Wuhan, but next thing you know, it hit every country in the world. So who are this year's winners and losers by industry, countries, or regions that will either benefit or be challenged by the pandemic?
Well, globally, we're all losers because we're all struggling, and it's costing a lot of money to repair the damage. Within industries, it's not a mystery. If you're in a business that has figured out the online commerce, you're not in a brick and mortar operation, you're a big winner. You're a big winner because there was a massive shift of consumer spending because there weren't many ways you could get things. You're doing everything online. Guys that are this is really quite one of the big losers, the hospital system. Isn't that an irony? The hospital system. You know why? Because the hospitals had to suspend elective procedures in order to make room
Right.
for COVID patients. Well, that's how they make their living with
Yeah,
surgical
right.
procedures. So we saw that in today's GDP numbers too, by the way. The decline in healthcare spending is almost 1/3 of the total drop in GDP. So back in May, when 30 states allowed hospitals to start to open up for surgical procedures,
Mhm.
it was a huge break. And we haven't seen that full impact of that, but I see it around me. All the ambulatory centers, they're all busy again. Doctors are busy again, and so that was really tough on the healthcare system. Not
It's
only
ironic when,
it is
yeah, it's
ironic.
ironic when you think about it because you figure if
Yeah,
anything, healthcare would benefit. But you're right. Their bread and butter is elective surgery,
yeah,
and further to the point you made is that hospitals are in fact laying off staff.
I know.
Um, you
They
figured
don't
this would
make
be
a
the
lot of
time when
money.
they'd be hiring more.
I know that's the irony in this, and we need them. That's the problem. The other business that's really interesting, if you're in the consumer businesses, things that could be deferred, or things that like home improvement kinds of businesses. One of my clients, they make split air conditioners. I don't know if you know what those are. Little mini air conditioning units that are used in apartment buildings. People put
Oh,
them
okay.
to cool off when they can't keep up with the business. And you know why? Because everybody's working from home. And so they're home in the middle of the day when it's hot, and they're realizing they need to do more to air condition their place, or they want to stay closer to home. So they're saying, oh, maybe I should improve my kitchen or do something.
Yeah,
Anybody in that
sure.
business is really doing well.
Yeah, Jim, it's funny because some of the industries or some of the products that become popular in a pandemic, you would have never thought of before. I mean, it goes beyond the run on toilet paper, but bicycles, for example, you can't
Oh,
buy a new
yeah,
bike anywhere.
I know.
So people are staying at home and exercising and trying to make the best of a bad situation. So how just turning to China, how will it seems like a seemingly intractable trade relationship between Beijing and Washington. How do you see that impacting the international economy at large?
I don't think this crisis changes it. It's generating a lot of noise. But I heard a clever quip from a colleague of mine who said, competition is going to be noisy, cooperation is going to be quiet. And here's the thing that I think we Americans sometimes lose sight of. What's driving the globalization? It's not because we're demanding that the world wake up and go to work. It's because people woke up a while ago, thanks to the internet, and realized that we all live a lot differently than they do. And they have ambitions to develop and to try to catch up to where we are. And in doing so, they're relatively open to outside help. So that's creating huge opportunities for Americans and Europeans and Japanese. And I honestly think it's that process that's in the driver's seat, not the politics. When you have competitors, this happens even at a local industrial level. Americans are used to growing up in the post-World War II era where we're the lone superpower. But we now have sleeping giants waking up, and they do things differently. We're not happy about how they do things, but there's more competition. And I really think that competition brings out the best of all of us, and that we're going to become mutually interdependent. It sort of reminds me of a quip that Angela Merkel made when Russia's President Putin annexed the Crimea. Angela Merkel, one of my favorite leaders, said, the Cold War is long behind us. We don't live in an era of Cold War anymore. We live in a world where we're becoming much more interdependent. And people who do things to disrupt that process may find that it does more harm to them than it does to the world. And I think that's an important insight, because what it tells you is there's massive opportunity. Every one of our businesses can tell you about the opportunity in China and India and other places. And so to me, yeah, we're going to complain a lot, and there's going to be, that's what comes with the territory. But we have a lot to gain in China advancing down this path. And we have a lot to gain in India rising, and we have a lot to gain in the whole world actually catching up to our level of living standard, because the higher the living standards in the world, the more the world, the more we have to offer them. And if you just look at all of our campuses, look at the campuses, it looks like it's one of our big exports. Foreign students everywhere. The university system depends a lot on this, and that's the world that we live in.
Yeah, especially in how they populate the technical disciplines.
Yeah.
Engineering. You visit a campus like MIT or University of Michigan or Stanford, and these are the kind of people that we want to keep here. But
I live in a town, by the way. I can see this is the future middle class, is what I see. It's no longer the guy that goes to the factory where the robot's now doing the job. It's the guy that speaks IT language and artificial intelligence. My community flipped in the span of 10 years. They're all from the India Institute of Technology, all techies, and that's our world. And that's
for sure.
And there's a lot of opportunities in that world. But boy, it takes a lot of education and training to get into that.
You're taking me down the road to immigration reform, but I promise I'm not going to touch that. It's so frustrating because here we have an opportunity to be the mecca of global talent from around the world, and it's just being so politicized. But that's another issue for another time. But,
and by the way, that would be a big solution to our deficit issue. People worry about our debt and deficit right now. Well, anything we can do to get more energy in the U.S. economy, and that is fill those 6 million jobs we can't find people for.
That's right.
And immigration reform is a big part of that. Infrastructure investment. There's a lot of things we can do to solve the deficit problem by just growing the economy faster.
A lot of people, subscribe to that zero-sum mentality, but it's all about growing the pie bigger for everyone. So,
exactly.
Well, in closing, are there any final thoughts that you'd like to discuss? In particular, are you bullish, bearish? I think I think it probably would be the former. I'm sorry, the latter. I think you sound more bullish than anything else.
Yeah. No, I mean we've got big challenges until we get the medical answer, which isn't going to be far down the road because we have a lot going on in the medical arena. Five important areas. I think honestly, I think personally, long story short, I think the equity market's got the right idea that yes, this is disruptive. It did hit the market for a while, but then when we step back and think about it, we realize, well, good things, we learn a lot from crises. We're going to do things to make us better off medically. And meanwhile, the things that have been driving the equity market, fundamental things that are changing the way we work and live, point to a lot of opportunity in the future. I think long term, I'm remain optimistic. And to me, this story began in the 1990s.
Sure.
What I learned in school is very different from what I think now.
Right.
And it's a reminder if there's a lot going on here, and we just haven't got our hands around all of it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know my economics instructor at Michigan, and we're talking like 30 years ago, so I'm really dating myself here. But nevertheless, this always stuck with me that that Wall Street is always like maybe 90 days or so ahead of Main Street. Would you agree with that? And that kind of gets back to why there is maybe a disconnect between the two.
Yeah, they have an incentive because if we're going to do things different in the future and there's opportunity in that, there's a huge incentive as an equity investor to try to figure out what does that mean. So that's why they're always going to be steps ahead of the reality, and particularly now when you're in the middle of a crisis that isn't going to last forever. We're going to get back on our feet, and I think quicker than people think. It's going to feel like it reminds me of New Orleans. New Orleans, when Hurricane Katrina hit them, we focused a lot of energy on helping New Orleans get back on our feet. Within 5 months, unemployment was back to where they began. Part of that was because people scattered to Baton Rouge and Houston, but within 2 years, we had New Orleans back on its feet. Employment was back where it started. And I think that's a reasonable way to think about what we're in the middle of.
I think so, particularly, you know, Americans by nature were pretty resilient. So
Yeah,
that's why, you know, I think that 2021, I mean, it's been a difficult year, but I think 2021 offers a lot of promise. So,
I agree.
and we're beginning to see that, you know,
Yeah,
little by little, every day the
yep,
news seems to get better as
yep.
the pandemic sort of slows down. And one day, hopefully within the next year, we'll be able to stop it in its tracks, depending on how
Yep.
you know, how quick they are to develop a vaccine. So,
Yeah.
well, Dr. Glassman, thank you as always for your enlightening insights about the state of the global economy and its future. We look forward to you once again keynoting Automation Annual Global Business and Economic Outlook for 2021 and beyond on January 14th of next year.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
And thank you again for being part of this
And everybody
discussion.
just hold on. We'll get there.
Yep, for sure. I believe.
Yeah.
All right, Jim. Thank
All
you
right.
again. Take
Bye.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.